Hello there, it's OffED back at it again with another commentary, but this time it's not going to be one of my full game commentaries that I usually make. There are many games that I play where I'm not going to make a huge video explaining what happens because I can't be bothered to film it or it wouldn't be interesting to do so, but what I thought I'd do, for the sake of good old-fashioned internet content, is talk about a few things that I thought were either interesting, particularly good, or particularly bad in games that I play outside of the usual channel activity. Just for the sake of talking about it. Maybe it will be interesting. At the very least, it's interesting to me. So, it's time to talk about a game that interested me recently, and it's what we have on the screen right here. It is called Delta V, the Delta being an actual Delta, making it extra hard to search for on Steam, but luckily it comes with the subtitle Rings of Saturn, so you can search for that if you want to actually find this game anywhere. That's what I had to do anyway. So, we're going to take a look at a few interesting things about it. It's a space, floating around, picking up rocks kind of game that's super chill and not that much happens, and that's why it's good. Now for the long version of me saying that with some extra actual things to say. This is a game where essentially you're mining things at the Rings of Saturn. So all the stuff floating around here is the rings. It's the rings up close, just lumps of ice floating around. Our goal is to not get killed by them as we float past them. You can go as deep into the rings as you can. And I presume, I haven't confirmed this yet, but I presume you mine better stuff if you can get really far into the rings. But actually getting into the rings means you have to drift past all of these asteroids. I think later in the game, when you get rich, there are ways to start deeper in the rings. But for now, at the beginning of the game, I have to get used to the inertial flight controls. So this is a game with full inertial controls. I've talked about this in a few videos recently, saying I want a game to try and do full inertial controls, but every time I mention it, I end up giving the caveat that I think it would be really bad and it wouldn't control very well. Well, in this game, I really enjoy the full inertial controls. Look how hard I had to work to force myself to crash there. Some terrible piloting from Devon. I was totally not going to hit that rock, and I just tried to avoid it by turning into it. I don't know what I'm doing. One thing I'll say about the full inertial controls is that there are tank controls in this game. The dirty word. If you saw my recent rant about tank controls, you might know where I'm going with this. But this game actually doesn't have the usual tank control issues because of that. This thing that just came up here, this green circle, what does that mean? It means you're using screen space controls now. Yeah, baby. Looks like the anti-tank control crew has another victory. Essentially, you have both tank controls and screen space controls, and you can use them simultaneously. It's really good, basically, because the tank controls have loads of niche uses, and they're more efficient in that they use less fuel if you fly with tank controls, because the way screen space controls are implemented is that you say what direction you want to go. That's that sort of ring in front of my ship here, and the autopilot will just do some sort of crazy button inputs on the tank controls to make it happen. There, chasing after a bit of rock flying through space, I was going way too fast and didn't see ahead of me that there was an asteroid we were both plummeting towards, so while I successfully mined a rock, we slammed into a much bigger rock and I was forced to start my run again. Anyway, so if you don't like the tank controls, you're in luck with this game, which I wasn't able to say for recent games where I was ranting about tank controls, basically. So this is good, it's what I like to see, and I quite like the tank controls in this game, because when you combine that with full inertial physics, contrary to my previous claims that this would be the worst possible combination, the inertial part makes the tank part way better, I think anyway, and it's because it makes really small moves really powerful. Tapping a button makes such a big difference when there's no friction in the environment. Every change you make to your trajectory is going to be compounding. And there's also a trajectory marker, that thing to the right of the screen that you can barely see. Essentially, you can work out where your ship's going to go in the future, so it's quite easy to plan how to manage your momentum and try to maintain your momentum using a minimum amount of fuel to keep going. As you saw there, I did a pretty rad move. I couldn't avoid a rock in front of me, so I span around and made it collide with the engine instead of the front of the ship, because if the engine's firing, most of the rocks out here are just water, so they'll melt, and you'll take way less damage doing that, or no damage at all. It also starts playing epic rock music if you do something cool like that. Made me think of something like Devil May Cry, like it's giving me a style score. I'm cool at mining now, so I get the better background music. Sort of felt very rewarding in that sense. Probably this isn't how you're supposed to fly. I seem to recall, in the quote-unquote tutorial, it said don't fly at more than 50 meters per second. We're at 80 something right now, and that was because it takes a long time to fly through the asteroid fields, and I sort of had this idea that maybe I was going somewhere, maybe I need to fly through the fields. I don't think, in retrospect, that it matters that much. Well, the fact that I didn't know, I suppose, is the comment to make. I was giving myself a hard time because I figured we were supposed to go as deep as possible before actually starting to mine things. And I think it does make a difference, but not a very big difference, in that a lot of the stuff you can find a bit deep is also right on the surface as well. So I'm probably wasting my time and causing runs to fail because I'm not very good at piloting, trying to go through this stone labyrinth. While I say I enjoy doing this, there is something I want to say that I don't enjoy. It's something that might be very specific to me, so let's look into this. It's the way the strafe controls work. On the Steam Deck, on your right hand, on the face buttons, X and B, so the right and left face buttons, control your strafing, so that makes me, from my perspective in this journey, go up and down on the screen. And as you can see, I just failed at doing that and drove right into a rock. If you were looking very closely, you might have seen I strafed into the rock. I could have avoided it, but I deliberately chose to apparently crash into it. And the reason for that is that the strafe controls are the other way around to how I keep thinking they should be. And the reason for that is that it's inconsistent with the main engine controls. So allow me to explain a little bit. I'll also mention, by the way, this thing I'm looking at right here. You have this engineering screen where you can try to fix the fact that your thrusters get misaligned or break in different ways, and there's a really detailed way to sort things out that was only briefly covered in the tutorial that I'll come back to. For now, we're just going to die because we have a fuel leak and we're spinning out of control. It's all going very well. Anyway, what I was going to say is that when you want to say strafe to the left, you want the ship to move its trajectory a little bit to the left, what you're supposed to do is press the left of the strafing buttons. Well, that's easy enough, isn't it? So why am I complaining about that? It's because to move to the left, you fire the engines that are on the right. So I kept pressing the right button, thinking about firing the right engines so that I could move left. And I think the reason I can justify thinking like that is that when you want to move forwards or move faster to fire the main engine, you press A, the face button, which is the down face button. In other words, you're pressing the button in the direction where the engine is. So you're sort of pressing the button to say shoot the propellant that way. But that's only for the main engine. For the thrusters, you do the other way around. You say I want to go that way, so throw the propellant the opposite direction to the way I'm pressing. Does anybody know what I mean? For some reason, I'm still tripping over this constantly, like even later into the game. And by constantly, well, this sounds like an exaggeration, doesn't it? No, constantly. Every single time I want to strafe, I strafe the wrong way first. For whatever reason, I simply can't get my head around that. I wonder if there's an option somewhere to fix it, but I kind of want to just make it work in my own head. I don't know why. This is a very personal comment to me, obviously, but for some reason, I need the strafing controls to be inverted, and this actually matters in the game because I crash constantly as a result of this. Like, I would say almost every time I crash, it's because I strafed in the wrong direction. Although sometimes it's just because I was going way too fast, as we saw earlier, but later and later, as I got slower and slower, I would still crash all the time, even just like being stationary right next to an asteroid and thinking, I'll thrust away from this asteroid, and then of course thrusting straight into it by getting that control thing wrong. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just thought I'd comment on that. Does anyone else know what I'm talking about right here? Well, another thing to comment on is the tutorial, which I touched on earlier. We saw flying past all sorts of screens recently, and there's all sorts of stuff on the screen right now, for example, and the way the game tutorializes itself is interesting, I thought. It's almost a game unto itself, you could say. There is the basic in-game tutorial where it shows you the controls and shows you how to switch between like tank controls and the screen space controls and just what to do generally speaking. But then there is a tutorial video. There's 2 tutorial videos actually that explain more of the meta about what you're expected to do in the game and some advanced techniques, but the way it does it is through a narrative. It's like a stage play or an audio play of an experienced pilot talking about some things they think about while flying their ship. And in the second video, it's a few pilots speaking to each other. So you kind of are like a new pilot who's eavesdropping on experienced pilots, and you sort of get some vague ideas about what you might want to do out there from what they say. I don't want to get into explaining the whole game, but basically, for example, on the right there, among all the stuff, there's reactor temperature at the very bottom of the list, and in the second tutorial video, one of the pilots was constantly telling one of the other ones to check the reactor temperature, and you sort of gradually glean why that might be and what is going to cause the reactor temperature to change and why you might want it to be at a certain temperature for certain things and certain maneuvers, things like that. It's probably too detailed to get into, but I liked the way it was tutorialized through that sort of really passive system that really leaves you with nothing, but if you think about it, maybe you can get something out of it. It was interesting, but I noticed in the comments of those videos, people were just saying this is the worst tutorial ever, and I sort of sympathize with that. It really doesn't give you much help about how to play the game if you go through the tutorial, but it was sort of interesting to me. Well, I don't know, I sat in the bath and watched it and thought it was quite jovial, and I came away thinking, you know what, I am gonna check the reactor temperature the next time I fly my ship, that sort of thing. I just came to understand the game a little bit more. And I think it was interesting that that was the sort of mandatory tutorial that was on the title screen as the thing to learn the game. It didn't seem that helpful to me, but I enjoyed it. Another thing to mention along a similar line is probably what you've been thinking already. There's loads of stuff on the screen. What even is all this stuff? So the game itself doesn't really do the best job of explaining what this stuff is or how it works or why you need to pay attention to it. Those tutorial videos do a little bit of that. But essentially at first I was like, this is way too much stuff to put on the screen. But after playing for a while I was like, yes, you need all of this stuff on the screen. I came to appreciate it very quickly after the first hour or so, because I was like, yeah, having all of these numbers constantly is really good. And you know me, I'm a numbers guy. I always say there should be more numbers, but even I was like, this is too many numbers, until I flew around and I was like, actually it does matter to know like your power draw, as it says on the right somewhere. And that thing in the top right is giving you some idea of how damaged and worn out your systems are. There's that thing that says visual feed, and it's like, well, what even is that? After a while I worked out it's like a top-down view of the rings of Saturn, trying to show you where you are, and the tiny flashes are the engines of other ships. So if you keep half an eye on that, you can tell where other ships are burning their engines hot or cold, and probably guess where some action is happening, like if there's a fight or something, because there is combat in this game, and I've died to it a few times, but I don't have footage of that. Basically, everything on the screen is useful for one thing or another, and it's part of the general chill space mining experience. You actually need to know everything that's on the screen right here. You can even actually buy other HUDs, so if you don't like this HUD, in the game it gives you the option to completely revamp the HUD as a sort of like package, like in universe you're buying a new software package for your ship's computer so that it has a different HUD. I really liked that idea, all good stuff. One thing that's really hard in this game is mining rocks. You can see in this footage I'm struggling right here, because, well, the start ship you get, the ship you start the game off with, is not very good at space mining. It's really hard to get a rock. The reason is, you mine rocks by shooting at them, which is just a terrible way of doing it. There's another crash. Because of course, when you shoot at a rock to break it open to get the delicious minerals inside, the minerals just take on the momentum of what you were shooting at it with, and they just fly off all over the place, leading to these really difficult chases after materials. And it's one of these things where after a short amount of time playing the game, you can change out your ship's equipment and buy new stuff to make this part way easier. So the hardest part of the game is the very beginning. The starting ship is really hard to mine and make money with, but once you make a bit of money, you get, well, I'll show you the later ship I have, which has microwave beams to melt asteroids instead of blowing them up, and even comes with an arm that just picks up stuff out of space and puts it in your mouth, which avoids the issue of constantly having to somehow jet your mouth over the rocks to make them go into the ship, and you both have your own momentum to worry about, and while the camera's zoomed in doing that, you'll probably crash, as you saw me doing earlier. that sort of thing. So the game got way easier and way chiller after a few hours of playing it. So I'm glad that I soldiered through it, because it certainly was difficult to get started. Essentially, the controls and the metagame got easier and easier, and it makes me wonder, should the game have some meta info in the tutorial, like, by the way, your starting ship sucks? Like, it should tell you not to really focus too hard on getting good at using the starting ship because it is supposed to be difficult, something like that. Because I could see myself just trying really hard and just feeling inadequate that I couldn't mine very well with this starting ship, but it really is much worse than some of the really early upgrades you can get. So that's just a meta point to make. If you haven't played this game, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's going to be the case for everything we're talking about in this video, no doubt. Well, if you have any thoughts on what you've seen so far about Delta V, leave a note in the comments. I've been really enjoying Delta V. And before I leave, I'll make a side note, which is that my introduction to this game was somebody commenting on a previous video saying that I would hate it because it had tank controls. Well, I kind of do hate the tank controls, I guess, but I like using them. As I said, the inertial physics make them kind of fun because there's more to think about. It makes more sense to have tank controls on a ship that pilots specifically, like how this one does. And of course, you don't have to use them, since you can just switch to autopilot and screen space controls at any time, and I often do. It's really nice like that, and I wish all games with tank controls in space would let you do that as well. I forgot, I need to come up with some bad things to say about the game for commentary purposes, so here's something that struck me as being bad about the game. It's on the screen right now. The UI text inconsistency is one thing, and the other is the use of slightly blurry drop shadows. It's your boy, the UI critic, back at it again. So the two main issues I have with the UI are, first, that it doesn't always use the same font for a lot of things, and I mean, that's fine, you can get away with that. Usually you want to stick to like 2, but I feel like I've seen 3 in the game, and this makes me mad for some reason. The other, perhaps more important, text issue is that some menus have bigger text in them than, say, the title of the menu or the button that goes into the menu. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about? Yes, I'm also thinking that of myself. For whatever reason, I got mad at something about the way the text was different sizes in different places, and it wasn't going in some sort of order, like as you go down through menus the text gets smaller or something. I guess that's what I wanted. Like right here, it says standard cargo bay, standard cargo bay baffles, and then there's some stuff about pricing on the right. Different use of caps and all caps, some different fonts as well, different colors, and just overall I thought there's something messy about this. Maybe it could be done better, it could be organized more nicely. Well, I don't know what I'm talking about. A perhaps more obvious point to make is something at the top of the screen, and that's a place where things are pretty messy because it's several UIs on top of each other, and they can all block each other to some extent. There are graphs, there's text, there's some sort of simulation going on in the middle, and you do find that it's a little difficult to know what I'm supposed to be taking away here. Like, as I'm looking at these autopilots and comparing them, I'm wondering, are the numbers changing? Do these graphs mean something? What am I supposed to be gleaning from all of the info being given here? Probably too much info this time, too much number on the screen. Not quite sure, of course, but it's one of those things where someone who knows what they're doing can probably look straight through this and see immediately what the point of all these like graphs and numbers going across the screen is. But for me, well, I didn't really. I like though that you can just buy a better autopilot. If you think the screen space controls aren't good enough, buy better controls in the shop. Now we're starting to think about good control schemes. A control scheme where it lets you progress to different control schemes, and things might get easier. Very nice, I thought, and it's nice because it's immersive and realistic. Yes, in space, if your ship has bad controls, you just go and buy better controls. This actually makes sense. Well, anyway, there's a look at some of the different HUDs as well you can get in the game. I think I'll just stop talking about Delta V now because, I don't know, I'm really, for some reason, grasping at straws to say why I don't like it. I feel like I have to be balanced and say, here's something bad about the game, rather than just coming in and saying, here's a game that's good. I guess I don't like gushing commentaries on things. I'm like, I want to see some objective analysis. So I'm going to say this menu is an absolute goddamn mess. It does work, and you have to get used to it, but at first glance, my first impression was like, what is going on here? It looks, I suppose, unprofessional. Maybe that's the best way to put it. It gives the impression that the game is going to be worse than it is because the menu could be better. That sort of thing. At least it does to me because I'm a menu nerd, so obviously that's my bias in coming at these things. why don't we get out of here? I think Delta V was pretty good. A random unknown game, it's pretty cheap as well. If you like picking up rocks in space and playing a game that has the vibe where you're basically in a huge void alone doing a menial task, then you'll really like it. And that's exactly the sort of thing I like. I like things like 7 Days to Die and even Dark Souls, where you're just alone and it's quiet and nothing happens most of the time. I like that sort of solitude, exploring, just doing your own thing, completely in your own head kind of game. And this is definitely one of those things, and I found it compelling because of that. And I think the fact the controls are kind of difficult adds to that, because you have to concentrate quite hard to do very much in the game. But that concentration is so chill. You're usually concentrating on stuff sort of floating gently really close together, and you're just tapping the controls, making the odd change here and there, which requires a lot of mental input, and you don't really get much out of it, I suppose. But I found it very both relaxing and engaging at the same time, in such a way that it's almost not relaxing because it's so tense a lot of the time with the movement controls. I'm not quite sure what I'm getting at here, other than whatever weird combination of things was happening here, I thought it was quite good. It somehow hit that do weird stuff alone, pure escapism sort of game that I really liked. And I saw the developers saying that they thought their game was one that people would either love or hate, and they just knew it was like that. They weren't going to try and cater to all people. Well, looks like I got lucky this time. I'm someone being catered to by a game that I played. That doesn't always happen, so I was happy to have stumbled across Delta V in this way. I'm pretty sure there is like a plot and stuff to do in the game, like some development that doesn't seem obviously to be there, but from the way the developers are talking about the game and from stuff I saw in the patch notes, it kind of feels like there's a storyline and quests and like character missions and stuff. My first impression, having played the game for about 8 hours, is that this isn't in the game. So something's going on there. This game's deeper than it looks. And what I don't know is, do the developers realize how undeep it looks from the outside? I can't tell that there's lots of content in this game. I could only tell sort of in the meta sense, in that in the patch notes it heavily implied this content was there. Things like that. So I suppose that's a concern, but it also means I'm looking forward to exploring the game more, since I did find out about that extra stuff to look for. Of course, if I hadn't found out about that, that would be a problem, so we need to make it so that it's not possible to be in a scenario where you don't know about it, that sort of thing. Well, we're going to stop ranting right now. Enjoyable game. Next time I play something I enjoy or have something to say about, I will post it, and I've had a few of those recently actually. I've been playing lots of games recently. So, more short videos like this, perhaps even shorter if I can manage it, will be on the way. Thank you for watching. Actually, one more point to make. Because I liked the inertial physics so much, the full inertial physics, the thing that, as I said earlier, I thought wouldn't work, and I was really surprised by how enjoyable I found it to fly with 100% realistic inertial physics. We need an actual combat game to try and do this in combat. I say that because I was talking to somebody in a comment section somewhere about how it would be impossible to make a combat game with full inertial physics because it would be too annoying, and I was inclined to agree because that was my instinct as well. But after having actually played a game like this, which does have combat, and I have been shot at and shot somebody else, the way the inertial physics means you change your handling perspective on everything, and the way that small changes make big deals to your trajectory, things like that. It's just a really unique and fresh experience on piloting a ship in space. The way that it's hard is really rewarding because making very small moves can be so powerful. There's some sort of point I'm gesturing at here. Somebody take something like Star Sector, for example, and give it full inertial physics, and some weird ass, cool ass, difficult to control ass stuff will happen. And that's it for these ass thoughts from Offie D.